It was an exceptionally heavy night. I had endured an exhausting day at work, dealing with tight deadlines and an endless pile of tasks. By the time I finally got home, I was completely overwhelmed with fatigue. With no energy for anything else, I took a quick shower, had a light meal, and went straight to bed. The environment was tranquil, with the lights off and silence pervading the room. The only source of illumination was the soft glow of the moon filtering through the partially open curtains. As I settled under the covers, the relief was immediate. However, this relief quickly gave way to an unsettling sense of pressure in my chest. As I drifted off to sleep, I didn't realize I was about to enter a state of sleep paralysis. The awakening was sudden and disorienting. It felt as if I was fully awake but unable to move a single muscle. My body was seemingly immobilized, and the sense of helplessness was overwhelming. The air seemed charged with an invisible weight, making it difficult to breathe. Panic began to set in as I struggled in vain to move my arms and legs. My gaze, still fixed on the ceiling, tried to scan the surroundings. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. It was then that I saw it, a dark, vague shadow in the farthest corner of the room. The shadow appeared to move slowly, as if it had a life of its own. Although the view was blurred, the figure had a distinct enough shape to evoke a growing sense of fear. The shadow's movement was almost imperceptible, but I could sense its increasing presence. The feeling that something was slowly approaching was accompanied by an oppressive weight. My heart began to race, and an overwhelming sense of terror engulfed me. I desperately tried to make noise, to scream, but no sound came out. The paralysis was complete. The shadow seemed to writhe and stretch, as if trying to reach me. Every time I tried to move a finger or make any motion, the sense of oppression intensified. It was as if the shadow was exerting an invisible pressure on me, heightening the fear. The environment was immersed in absolute silence, amplified by the terror I was experiencing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, though it might have been only a few minutes, the feeling of paralysis began to gradually fade. I managed to move my fingers, and the pressure on my chest started to lift. When I finally got up, the shadow had vanished, but the sense of panic remained. I got out of bed, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. The first thing I did was check the room and the surrounding areas, but I found no signs of an intruder or any reason for the feeling of presence. It was clear to me that the shadow was not real, but the experience was terrifying enough to leave a lasting mark. The next day, still shaken by the experience, I discussed the episode with a friend. He explained that what I had experienced was a classic symptom of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that can occur when the brain is partially awake, but the body is still in REM sleep. While the explanation helped me understand the experience, the sense of terror and the feeling of being watched continued to haunt me. The night was calm and quiet, a true pause after a day full of meetings and appointments. I was alone at home, enjoying a rare moment of tranquility. After dinner and relaxing on the couch with a good book, I decided to go to bed early. The sense of exhaustion was palpable, and I could barely keep my eyes open as I settled under the covers. The soft light from the bedside lamp cast a warm glow in the room, creating a cozy atmosphere. However, this sense of comfort was soon replaced by something far more unsettling. As soon as I fell asleep, I was abruptly awakened in a state of complete confusion. The first thing I noticed was my inability to move. My body felt rigid, and the sensation of being paralyzed was overwhelming. I was conscious, yet completely unable to move any part of my body, including my fingers and toes. I desperately tried to make some sort of movement, but it felt as if an invisible force was holding me down. The air seemed denser, and there was an overwhelming weight on my chest, making breathing difficult and irregular. The room was almost eerily silent, but the feeling of an unsettling presence was unmistakable. I was terrified, and fear began to take hold as I struggled to understand what was happening. As my mind tried to process the situation, I began to hear faint, almost inaudible sounds coming from within the room. There was a low, indistinct murmuring, as if someone was speaking in a very soft tone. The sound was so subtle that it felt as though I was listening through a tunnel. The sensation of being watched intensified. It was as if an invisible presence was circling around me, observing me with disturbing attention. I could feel the weight of the presence, as if it was gradually drawing closer. The air seemed to grow heavier, and the feeling of oppression on my chest increased with each passing second. In the corner of my field of vision, I began to discern an indistinct figure. Although I couldn't see clearly, there was a vague and shapeless form that seemed to move slowly. The figure didn't have a defined shape but was clearly perceived as a sinister presence, like a distorted shadow floating through the room. The fear was palpable, and with each attempt to move a muscle, the figure seemed to come closer. The pressure on my chest intensified, and the feeling of panic began to overwhelm my thoughts. I tried to scream for help, but no sound escaped my mouth. Absolute terror consumed me. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of panic and hopelessness, the paralysis began to slowly dissipate. I managed to move my fingers, and the pressure on my chest started to ease. The figure in the corner of my vision disappeared, and the low murmuring ceased. I got up, trembling and sweating cold, and went to the living room to catch my breath. The environment was exactly as I had left it, with no signs of an intruder or disturbance. Although I knew the experience was a hallucination caused by sleep paralysis, the feeling of an invisible presence and the physical oppression were terrifying. The next day, after discussing the incident with a friend, he confirmed that what I had experienced was typical of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that can cause hallucinations and feelings of oppression. Even so, the terror and the feeling of being watched lingered with me, and the room never felt as serene again. It was a calm and uneventful night. I had spent a tiring day filled with meetings and appointments, and I was eager for a restorative rest. I decided to go to bed early to make up for the lack of sleep from previous nights. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp that I had left on. As I settled under the covers, the sense of comfort was almost tangible. The bed was a haven of tranquility, and the silence of the night was broken only by the occasional sound of cars passing outside. I fell asleep quickly, but what I didn't know was that I was about to experience one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I awoke suddenly, not with a jolt, but with an unsettling sense that something was deeply wrong. I was fully aware, but my body seemed unresponsive. I tried to move, but every effort was in vain. Sleep paralysis had set in, and I was trapped in a state of complete immobility. The first sensation I experienced was difficulty breathing. There was an overwhelming weight on my chest, as if someone was pressing down with force. Fear began to seep in, and I desperately tried to make any movement. My arms and legs felt heavy, and the effort to lift a finger seemed unattainable. Struggling internally, I began to hear a peculiar sound. It was a faint, persistent noise of footsteps, but they weren't coming from inside the room. It was as if someone was walking slowly outside the house, with the steps echoing and creating a sense of unease. The sound was intermittent, increasing and decreasing in intensity, as if the person was approaching and then moving away. The silence of the room was now heavy with a sense of presence. I was immobilized, but my field of vision was clear enough to notice what seemed to be an indistinct shape moving at the edge of my sight. There was an oppressive atmosphere in the air, and the light from the lamp cast long, distorted shadows across the walls and furniture. The feeling of panic grew as the shape seemed to draw closer. I could sense a threatening presence, and the air felt dense and almost tangible. With every frustrated attempt to move my body, the sensation of oppression intensified, as if the presence was getting even closer. The fear of being unable to escape or being attacked dominated my thoughts. Gradually, the feeling of paralysis began to recede. The pressure on my chest started to ease, and I was able to slowly move my fingers. The sound of footsteps also began to fade until it disappeared entirely. The shape I had perceived also vanished, and the room returned to its previous state. I got out of bed, still trembling and sweating cold, and went to the living room to try to regain control of my breathing and calm my racing heart. The house was silent and peaceful, with no signs of intrusion or disturbance. The next day, while discussing the experience with a friend, he explained that what I had encountered was a classic case of sleep paralysis, where awareness is active but the body remains paralyzed, often accompanied by auditory and visual hallucinations. Even knowing it was just an illusion created by my mind, the sense of terror and the feeling of a menacing presence lingered with me, affecting my perception of my surroundings.